After more than 3 decades in prison, Lyle and Eric Menendez, better known as the Menendez brothers, have found a meaningful path to starting their second chance. Because for years, all that they have wanted, all that their supporters have wanted, all that some of the surviving family members have wanted, is for them to have a chance to advocate for themselves and be considered. So earlier this year, legal proceedings determined that for the very first time, they are in fact eligible for parole. So they get to go in front of the parole board and advocate for themselves and be considered for release. They both went in front of the parole board, and the parole board turned them both down. Now, it didn't turn them both down because of the brutal 1989 slangs, but instead turned them down because of their conduct while they were in prison, saying that showed they were a threat to public safety. This brings up all sorts of issues and all sorts of questions, because if they had been allowed to introduce evidence of their abuse at the second trial, they may not have gone to prison in the first place. Or if they had, for not nearly as long, and they wouldn't have been in the environment where they said their conduct was so problematic. Because you don't go to prison, you don't have a chance to mess up while you're in prison. Second of all, the California prison system, especially 30 years ago, but even now, is an incredibly violent, brutal, gang-run place. So it's possible that they were forced into doing things that they didn't want to do because they didn't have any other option. It's also possible that they, as young men, were sentenced to serve life in prison without the possibility of parole, and they made decisions trying to maximize their comfort or their safety or their well-being because they didn't see any other option. Because let me tell you, as someone who has been sentenced to more than 3 decades in prison, I was put in situations in prison that I never would have been put in the street. And I made decisions in prison that I never would have made on the street because the environments are so different. There's some things I felt that I had to do or I had no options to do because I didn't have the resource or the safety or the possibilities I have out here in the world or I had out here in the world before. So sometimes saying that, oh, well, you did this while you're in prison is not a fair assessment of someone's behavior or their character because, again, the conditions are so dramatically different. Let's look at the fact of the case. Because back in August of 1989, Lyle and Eric Menendez killed their parents in brutal fashion, and it absolutely captivated the media. The media loved this story of these 2 wealthy sons who had killed their parents and the intrigue and all the things and the questions in the Beverly Hills mansion. But at their first trial came out the evidence of abuse, of years of abuse that they both experienced, that other people experienced, talking about living in fear, living in terror, basically living in a war zone because they said their father was a monster. Unfortunately, the first trial ended in a hung jury, and they were not allowed to introduce any of this evidence in the second trial. So in the second trial, they were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But if you think about it, it's like saying, oh, well, I kicked that dog for 10 years and then it finally bit me, but we can't talk about the kicking, we can only talk about the biting. It's absolutely insane. And being abused or having been violated or having been assaulted doesn't justify what someone does. It can make it a lot more explainable or understandable, though. Because in situations where we act like everyone has an even playing field is ignoring the trauma and the PTSD and the ways that people have had to cope or the ways that people have been driven to points of desperation. And I don't know the details. I was not there. But I'm saying that those details should be considered. Because having experienced assault, having experienced abuse, having experienced things myself, I know I was put into situations where I made decisions that I can't imagine making now. Having been a victim of crime, just like I've been a perpetrator of crime, I know what it is to be hurt. I know what it is to feel small. I know what it is to lash out to try to feel safe. If we're not willing to consider that, as they didn't in the second trial, should we consider them starting on a level playing field and operating the same as everyone else in prison? It doesn't really seem to make sense. Because think about it. You went into prison as a happy, healthy, go-lucky person, and you trusted the establishment and you trusted the police. Maybe that would be where you turn. But if you grew up in an environment that was designed as a war zone, where you never trusted anybody, when you feared for your safety, when you never knew what to believe or what to trust, would you go into prison with the same mindset? Would you go into prison with the same hope or belief? Or would you go in and scramble for your survival because that is what you had done for your entire life? Because that is fully what I believe that Lyle and Eric Menendez did when they went to prison. And there are bigger questions. Like where I was in Virginia, we don't have parole, so it's irrelevant. We abolished parole back in 1995, but in places that have parole, what should be considered? Should we only consider someone's conduct while they're in prison? Should we consider what led to that conduct? Should we consider the original sentence, or should we do as Virginia used to do before they abolished parole and keep people in because of the seriousness and circumstances of the crime, basically saying that we're not going to consider anyone's behavior? Had they been stabbing people or robbing people or engaging in things like that, I could understand. But these were allegations of connections with a cell phone or with a gang, which you really don't have a lot of choices of if you're in a California prison. Like, it's run by gangs. Again, you're going to get in a car, you're going to have that experience one way or the other. Maybe there's some independence. I haven't been there, so people could correct me on that. But the point being, it is not a neutral environment. And expecting people who've been traumatized from birth to act as if it's a neutral environment or act in a neutral way is just incredibly unrealistic. The truth is that the Menendez brothers are now in their 50s, And statistics say that their likelihood of recommitting a crime is incredibly low. They basically aged out of the possibility of crime. So judging them based on decisions they made to survive in prison seems dramatically unfair. Second of all, after more than 3 decades in prison, they're going to be vastly different people. And in many ways, they're not going to be better. Like prison, especially violent gang-run prison systems, don't make you a better person because they lack access to those services. They lack access to the programs. So when we're evaluating their conduct, are we actually evaluating the prison system itself? Are we actually saying, hey, this prison system is not good at rehabilitating people, or not good at supporting people, or not good at helping people develop, and instead often makes people worse? So why are we sticking people in there in the first place? Isn't there a better option? And after more than 3 decades inside and being in their 50s and with all the support they have, I don't see the cost. But my opinion doesn't matter. It's the parole board opinions that matter. And whether you believe they should be released or not, don't you believe that they should be considered in the whole? Don't you believe their story should be considered in its whole? Don't you believe the evidence of abuse should be considered in its whole? Because that was not allowed at trial. It wasn't the considered determining factor in front of the parole board. Basically, that was not the thing that we used as a lens to understand them. Instead, we're judging them just the same as everyone else. The point being, I think we need to take a different lens and recognize that the justice system, whether it's with them or with anyone else, doesn't get a full picture of an individual and doesn't get a full picture of what happened. If we actually care about justice and not just retribution or not just causing pain where pain has been caused, we need to take a bigger look at what's actually happening, what's actually going on with people. And we need to say, why did this happen? What can we do to stop this from happening to other people? And what can we do to help this person move forward in a better way so they don't continue to pass that pain on that was passed on to them? So what do you think? Do the Menendez brothers deserve a second chance? Whether you think they were abused or not, whether you think they fabricated the whole thing, whether you think it was absolutely brutal and premeditated, do you believe people can come back from that? Do you believe that people can change? Do you believe that people can become someone other than who they were 30 years ago? Because who were you 30 years ago? Like, drop a comment if you feel like you were your best version of yourself 30 years ago and you're somehow worse now. Or drop a comment if you say, hey, I was not the best person 30 years ago and I am a different person now and I believe that people can change. Because that's all I advocate for. I advocate for the belief that we don't have to be defined by the worst thing we've ever done, that there is always a path forward no matter how painful or how difficult it looks. It may not be where we want to go, but there is a path to a place other than here. And second of all, I want people to be free. I want people to be free of the mental, physical, spiritual bonds that they carry. I want people to live their lives. I want people to get out of the prison they're in, whether that's a physical prison or a spiritual prison or an emotional prison or a mental prison. I want to see people be free, and I do everything I can. I use all the power that I have to help people find the tools to liberate themselves. So in this case, I would like the Menendez brothers to be free. I would like to see them get that second chance. But what do you think? Do you think people are capable of liberation? Or once we're put in a prison, once we've lived in a prison for long enough, do we learn to love that prison? Do we learn to love the cage that we learned to love?